Which veterans could the Dallas Cowboys be targeting in free agency? All that and more in this episode of the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked on Cowboys.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use promo code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Landon McCool. You can check him out on Twitter at McCoolBCB. On today's show, we are talking about a few potential free agent targets for the Dallas Cowboys. And listen, before you roll your eyes in the back of your head, I get it. The Cowboys don't spend a lot in free agency anymore with Jerry Jones, Stephen Jones, and Will McClay. But it does feel like there are a couple positions this year, Landon, where the Cowboys almost have to sign a veteran before we get to free agency. And I think we've got to start at linebacker.
Yeah, I think linebacker's a spot, where it makes some sense, right? If you can find a good fit, you can avoid having to feel like you have to draft a linebacker in this class. I think that's a smart way to kind of, this is something the Cowboys want to do anyways, is kind of, fill in holes so they can draft freely. But I do feel like linebacker specifically, and running back, to be honest, are spots where you're going to be able to get some quality at middle range prices. And then it'll save you from having to draft if you don't want to draft a linebacker, but you'll still get good labor at cheap prices just because of the way the market is for those two positions.
It's also one of these positions where I don't know if I've ever seen this kind of depth at the linebacker position in free agency. Now, there's a good combination of younger and older guys, including like Patrick Queen, who's going to absolutely get paid. There's Bobby Wagner, Jordan. I'm going to read you some of the names. Bobby Wagner, Jordan Hicks, Frankie Louvu. We've got Levante David. There is Blake Cashman, Eric Kendricks, Aziz Al-Shahir, Tyrell Dodson, Jerome Baker, Kenneth Murray, Josie Jewell. Like the list goes on and on and on. And it does feel like the Cowboys could probably get a starting caliber linebacker at 2 years, $8 million. Maybe 2 years.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, depending on what you want to spend, like that's really, I think you can there's a sliding scale, obviously, but there's going to be a number of guys that we're going to talk about here in a sec that are all kind of fall into probably around that range of what you just talked about, like a $4 million a year up to probably, the guys that we're going to be talking about are in the $4 to $7 million range per year, like nothing more than that. Because I think that's really the top end of where they want to spend anyways.
And let's get to some names. You and I are probably of the belief that they would like to bring in a veteran linebacker to help maybe run the defense, maybe not be a full-time player, but somebody that can kind of just get them going. And I think that's why Eric Kendricks is the first name that comes to mind. He just got released by the Chargers. He obviously has a lot of experience with Mike Zimmer. He's not the same player that he was a few years ago, but I do think he is the type of linebacker that would make sense in a one-year deal.
Yeah, I think, as far as body type or player type that you want at the position, maybe he's not the perfect fit for what you feel like you're missing a little bit, right? He is kind of similar to the type of bodies that you would see in these kind of Quinn defenses that we previously had. But as far as an experience fit, as far as understanding the defense that he's about to walk into fit, there's literally no one better that you could probably get in free agency. He worked with Zimmer for almost 10 years or whatever long it was. So I think that when he got cut, obviously all Cowboys antennas went up because of his history with Zimmer. And again, I do think that, and honestly, like I went in last night, we kind of had a handful of players that we wanted to study, and my kind of point of view is, how much better or worse is this guy going to be than, say, Damone Clark, right? Because that's the thing is that you're kind of replacing that level of player, but you're going to be paying a lot more money because Damone Clark is a 5th-round pick, right? So, and I think Kendricks had a better year last year than Clark did. And I think you bring in some veteran presence. I do think that there is a risk here that if you sign somebody like big money, long-term guy, that, there's a chance that Clark may be better than them by the end of next season if he continues to improve. But I think having one of these kind of guys like Kendricks, some of these other folks that we've talked about, that's a veteran presence to kind of stabilize things while you hope your younger players get better. It makes a lot of sense. And I think especially for someone like Kendricks, who, like we said, has a ton of experience in this system, could quickly help the linebackers kind of digest it and understand what they're looking at. I think that's a smart thing to do.
I also don't know if there's a linebacker on this list other than Patrick Queen that I would want to sign to more than a 2-year deal. Like, I think all of these guys are kind of rentals. And I think that's the way the NFL is going at the linebacker position. It's rookie contract, 2-year deal, and then 1-year deals after that. I think that's just going to be the trend anymore. So with that in mind, listen, this is not my favorite name. It's not. I do think Bobby Wagner is a potential option for them. Bobby Wagner is a free agent again. I don't know if the Seahawks are going to bring him back with the new coaching staff there. Pete Carroll's no longer in Seattle. The Cowboys have obviously liked Bobby Wagner for a while, and I thought his game really regressed last year. But I could see Mike Zimmer being interested in bringing Bobby Wagner in for 1 year to kind of get this defense up to speed.
Well, I mean, let's be clear. Like, Bobby Wagner's game has regressed from quite a high height, from where he was. I think he played pretty decently last year. And I do think, certainly not to what, the legend of Bobby Wagner should project. I will say this, though, and I think I mentioned this on another pod, that Bobby Wagner, I'm pretty sure I saw this on Over the Cap, played a higher percentage of his team's snaps than any of the other free agent
hardly
linemen
ever came off the field.
That's pretty crazy, for a guy that's 34 years old. In the sense that his body is able to hold up for that many snaps. And it's not like, he probably took a step back from where he was, but it's not like he was playing worse football at the end of the year than he was at the beginning of the year. So he's holding up is what I guess I'm getting at, right? So, yeah, if you wanted to sign him for a 1-year deal, that makes a lot of sense because he's the kind of linebacker you're looking for, a bigger linebacker. He has lost a step, which means that he's not as valuable in coverage. But honestly, the other names that we're going to mention here, none of these guys are good coverage linebackers. And frankly, you've got the coverage linebackers that you need on the team already. Like Damone Clark, that's one thing he definitely can do. Is cover guys.
Marquise Bell.
Right? Yeah, exactly. Yep. So you've got guys who can handle that. What you need are guys who are good in the running game, who, if there's a play action pass, won't get you absolutely murdered, right? And I think that Wagner certainly falls into that category simply because, he's not the same guy that he was a year, especially not 2 years ago. But you're also not paying him probably what you would be paying him.
I bet he gets a 1-year, $3.5 million deal.
Yeah, and if that's the case, man, I'm all in on that because I think you're getting a guy who kind of fits really, really well with what you're looking for. It's crazy that he's maybe more of a fit now that Quinn is not so much because Quinn is gone, but just now that Quinn is gone because of what specifically you're trying to get right at the position, which was not something that Quinn was necessarily trying to go get. So I do think Wagner makes some sense. And I think he makes his current iteration makes sense for the Cowboys in the later years, veteran linebacker looking for a last few paydays, no longer the same kind of both two-way athlete that he was previously.
We've got to move on to some other positions, but really quickly, any other names that stand out for you at the linebacker spot?
Yeah, the kid from Tennessee, Azeez Al-Shahir. I think he's a guy that if you look at him, John Oning and I have been banting about him a lot for back and forth. He is, almost exclusively kind of one of these run stuffer type linebackers, early down linebackers that you see like taking on blocks, shooting gaps, making tackles for loss. He's not an enormous liability in the pass game. But he certainly isn't the kind of like true two-way player that gets paid big money. I will say that I think that he likely, just like based on what I saw on PFF from Brad Spielberger, that it sounds like this is one of those kind of younger linebackers that has enough future and oomph in his game that he may command or request at least a multi-year deal. But we're still talking at about the same kind of price range per year, like under $7 million.
I was gonna say like 2 years, 13 million. Like I think that's probably what he's gonna try to get in free agency.
Yeah. So and that's just a slightly different, kind of philosophy as opposed to the Kendricks, Hicks, Wagner
Jordan
section
Hicks.
of guys who are probably just on rentals, right?
Yeah, and Jordan Hicks is a name that I mentioned as well because he can be your, every down thumper. He's really good at blitzing. So I do expect the Cowboys to grab a linebacker here. Who that is, I think we'll find out next week. But Landon, let's go to the running back position because it does feel like the Cowboys are going to add a veteran running back at some point this offseason. Could that player be Derrick Henry? We'll get to that next. This episode is brought to you by Robinhood. Did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA? Robinhood has the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar that you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar that you transfer in from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right, no cap on the 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. This offer is good through April 30th. Get started at robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for some legal info. Claim as of Q1 2024, validated by Radius Global Market Research. Investing involves risk, including loss. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for 1 year from the date of your first 3% match. Must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years. The 3% matching on transfers is subject to specific terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA available to U.S. customers in good standing. Robinhood Financial LLC, member SIPC, is a registered broker-dealer. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We want to let you know that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. And now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV in the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today, now available on the free Fire TV channels app. All right, Landon, the two positions in free agency that I think are going to be the most suppressed in terms of value are linebacker and running back. But, man, there's a lot of good running back talent in this class. Is there anybody that jumps out to you?
Yeah, I mean, there's tons of guys, right? And that's really the problem is that there's just the vast, mass of folks. And we talked about yesterday that we think that there's a good chance that the Cowboys re-sign Tony Pollard. I don't know that necessarily precludes them from taking another running back in free agency too. So, but yeah, I mean, honestly, like we've kind of gone over a ton of these names before. A name that kind of is fascinating to me is Antonio Gibson. I think that, he's a guy that his touches, cratered last year. And I think it has a lot to do with the fact that he has had fumbling problems at different points with Washington. But I mean, they basically cut his touches in half. He becomes a free agent this year. So in a situation where what's interesting to me is when you go into a free agent situation where a whole position is not artificially, but just depressed because of the number of folks that are in it, whatever, right? And then you go in there, and in that group, there's also individuals that had disappointing years or injury years or reasons that they didn't perform the way that they were expected to, but that provide for an opportunity to bounce back. And clearly that is Will McClay catnip, right? Is that if there's a guy who you don't like because you don't think he can do it, but someone liked at some point, Will McClay will find a way to get him on the team. And I think that Gibson is a guy that I think you go into the year last year. And Washington was 2 years ago, rather. And Washington was really excited about what they had.
Do you remember that game on Thanksgiving where he absolutely dominated Dallas?
Yeah, I very clearly remember that game. And I think that, he at different points, he looked like a superstar on the rise. I mean, just because of his athletic ability, his talent, his speed at 220. And I think, we looked at him like almost kind of a bigger bruiser type version of Tony Pollard. I mean, both, Memphis running backs who kind of played that sort of weird hybrid running back wide receiver role. They both played together at Memphis. And so I think that he's a guy that, everyone on just honestly, you could pick tons of these names out and each one of them have kind of an interesting angle that you could find. But to me, a guy like Gibson, who is in an artificially depressed running back group already, and his career is kind of in a situation where it's in flux, you could potentially get a guy on a really cheap deal, on a deal so cheap that you might be able to go get a second guy, right? Or still feel like you could draft a guy and still play them both a lot. So I like the idea of throwing in Gibson, who is essentially a buy low situation, hoping that he kind of gets back to the heights that you saw previous in his career.
So I've got a big name running back and then a buy low option. Derrick Henry has been a guy that's been rumored for a couple of weeks now. There's even a report out there now that Derrick Henry wants to be the Cowboys starting running back this year. I'm not sure.
He bought a house in Dallas, from what I understand. So that means a lot, not like half the NFL doesn't live in Dallas.
Exactly. I have my doubts whether the Cowboys really want to spend up on Derrick Henry, because I do think he's one of the running backs that might actually get some notable money because of how much he's accomplished. We'll see there. The guy for me, the buy low target would be Clyde Edwards-Helaire, which first round pick for the Chiefs. And you're probably wondering, hey, if Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes couldn't use this player, why would Mike McCarthy and Dak be able to use him? One of the reasons is we just don't see Patrick Mahomes throw the running back very often because he's so good at scrambling around and making plays down the field or just using his legs that he doesn't need the check down option of a Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Whereas Dak Prescott, as Dak continues to age, he's becoming less and less mobile. And I do think he's more open to throwing the ball to the running back. I actually think like Clyde Edwards-Helaire was born to play like in a true West Coast offense, like somebody who could just catch 50 to 60 passes out of the backfield on wheel routes and on Texas routes. If you want to sign him at like the veteran minimum, which you probably will get, I kind of like that, especially Landon, if you pair him with a bigger back in in the draft. Maybe you draft Braylon Allen from Wisconsin or Trey Benson from Florida State. I think he projects as a really good third down passing back.
Yeah, and I think Marcus points out a really good, aspect of this whole thing, right? Is that you can kind of mix and match these guys in very interesting ways because you have so many options in free agency, right? And Clyde Edwards-Helaire is such a great example of a guy who, he was drafted in the first round with the hope that he could be kind of a complete back for a team that is, they felt like they just won the Super Bowl. They won not too long ago to this, and they needed a running back to kind of stabilize that group. And it just didn't work out the way they wanted it to, but that doesn't mean that he couldn't serve a very, very, specified role that he would thrive in, right? Like as a passing down back. And I think that's where, again, one team's trash is another team's treasure. And I think that the fit in the situation may work a ton better for Clyde here in Dallas, simply because there's not the pressure of being a first round pick and having to, fulfill the, complete running back, mold. Maybe that's not what his role is supposed to be in the NFL. Again, and I think it shows you the kind of pairings you can get here. And it doesn't even need to be a draft. Like I said, you could sign him and you're going to get him like Marcus said, probably for the vet minimum. That's, so cheap that you could probably still afford, if you wanted to sign a maybe a higher tier running back, and that's your pair, right? So even Pollard, I would say. Yep. I mean, those are kind of a weird pairing, but I mean that level of running back, right? So I like the idea of kind of getting, again, Gibson falls in this too. I like the idea of signing these really, really cheap but with big upside running backs, because it gives you the option to take more bites at the apple at the position, and that's the best way to find success, is to spread the injury risk out over multiple players, and hope that production comes in kind of cobbling together the position with a couple of different guys.
One more name really quickly, J.K. Dobbins, who has been incredibly efficient whenever he's played. The problem is he just doesn't play. Now he's coming off a torn Achilles that he suffered in week 1. We've seen running backs come back from that injury like in 9 to 10 months, like Cam Akers. I don't know what J.K. Dobbins has left. I think he's only like 24 years old.
Yeah, he's
With
so
not a lot.
young, and he's had so many lower body injuries.
I know.
It's like,
But hey, he's one of these guys. Like if he wants to sign a vet minimum deal, like just to be on a team so he can continue to rehab, he's not a bad swing for the fences move for a guy that really doesn't have a lot of touches, even going back to college. So
college.
yeah, look at the running back market because I do think the Cowboys are going to add somebody there. Let's go to offensive tackle because I've got a feeling, Landon, the Cowboys are going to look for a veteran stopgap. If they don't bring back Tyron Smith and Chuma Edoga, is there a former first-round pick that would make some sense for the Cowboys? We'll get to that next. This episode is brought to you by Game Time. You shouldn't have to worry when you're buying tickets to your next big event. Game Time is the fastest and the easiest way to buy tickets for all of the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. Game Time is the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. See the view from your seat before you buy so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. All-in prices show your total up front so that you know that you're getting a great deal before you check out. Buy tickets in seconds with just 2 taps. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem promo code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. Every dayers. Free agency starts on Monday. If we get any big news on Monday, I promise you we will break it down. Just don't hold your tongue.
Don't hold your breath.
Yeah. It's gonna be interesting. But we're also going to continue we're going to start some of our draft profiles, so make sure you tune in for that. But let's talk offensive line. Lynn, the Cowboys are likely to lose their starting left tackle, likely to lose their starting center. Is there anybody in this group that appeals to you at all?
There's a couple of guys that I feel like could be interesting looks at, right? I think if you're looking for like the kind of Will McClay special, and I think I mentioned his name earlier, I think Mekhi Becton makes some sense, right? This is a guy that was a 11th overall pick, less than 4 years ago or 4 years ago, right? And came out and in a COVID season, he was one of the rookies that came out the COVID year. So his first year was playing in an empty stadium, essentially. He came out and played pretty decently his rookie year, but then kind of dealt with a series of injuries over the 2021 and 2022 seasons. Came back out to start last year, and they started him over at, I'm just trying to remember, I think they started him over at right tackle, and he really, really struggled. And I remember against the Cowboys, he had probably maybe his worst game of his career, which, we have a very good pass rush last year, especially early. So, but I think this is a guy, and then he ended up getting injured, and they flopped him to the other side, and they kind of were moving around and dealing with the Jets, horrible offensive line. It didn't ever feel like he was 100% healthy, really. Fast forward to the end of the season, he starts playing better football. He starts, they have him back over the left side full time. By the end of the year, he's starting to get a little bit healthier. He's starting to play a little bit better. He's one of the only kind of brighter spots on the offensive line. And now he's a free agent. It's like his 5th-year option is going to be insane because he's a 11th overall pick. And now the Jets have decided to release him. So to me, this Will McClay saw that and his eyes got like saucers, right? Because he loves these guys. He loves the former first-round picks that people had potential in. Can he come relive some of that juice in Dallas? And I think he's a good reclamation project. He's still incredibly young. He's still incredibly athletic. He's a hard worker. This is not, you look at the guy and he's like 6'6", 360 pounds, and you worry about whether or not like he'll eat himself out of the league, but that's not the problem with this kid at all. So I think that there's a lot of positives in the details of Mekhi Becton. I think it's easy to look at his scenario from, afar and not kind of dive in deep and say, we don't want this reject, bust. I think you shouldn't give up on offensive linemen like that, especially with the planet theory that there's not very many of these guys. And Becton's a guy that has the athletic traits and the work ethic to go with it. Let's see if he can get past the injury part.
Do you remember back in 2007 when the Cowboys signed a massive right tackle who was widely considered a bust, that everybody thought was just going to eat himself out of the league, and they turned him into a Pro Bowl player? I'm referring to Leonard Davis.
Yep.
When the Cardinals took him at number 4, same thing. Played a little bit of guard, played right tackle. Injuries had an impact on him early in the year, and then just happened to be he got into a different situation, and his career took off. Like, this happens a lot of times for offensive linemen in the NFL. I don't think Mekhi Becton is going to command a big deal, but I'd be lying if I said I would be really excited about him on a 1-year flyer deal just to see, to see. Maybe he is really a left tackle, not a right tackle. Because remember, in college, he was a left tackle, and that's really why he got drafted. Maybe you slide him back over to left tackle and you pair Becton and Tyler Smith together. Now you're really getting your running game going again.
I mean, he clearly played better football on the left side. I think that's pretty much, that's pretty well established at that point, that I feel like the Jets made a big mistake not putting him on the left side. They have their own offensive line issues. That's fine. But I just think I love situations where you're dealing with an organization that was in chaos, that in free for all, right? And they're just going to misevaluate these kind of guys. And frankly, the Jets can't afford to pay him what they need to pay him to keep him there, and to evaluate to see if he is what they thought he was. But now that he's reached free agency, that changes all the angles for the other 31 other teams, that they're not on the hook for $15 million or whatever his 5th-year option is next year.
Yeah, I want to mention one more name, Andres Pete, who played guard and tackle for the Saints. He actually had to slide out to left tackle this year because of all the injuries. He's been a Pro Bowl guard before, but because of the Saints salary cap situation, I just don't know how much he's going to get paid. I think that's a really interesting option if the Cowboys decide that they want to make Tyler Smith their left tackle. You go out, you sign Andres Pete, you let him play left guard, and then maybe you get to camp and you realize that you're better off switching those two. You could do that. I don't think he's going to go for a lot of money because there has been some injuries in his career. But again, he's only 30 years old. I think you could squeeze another 2 or 3 really solid years out of him.
I think you could say the same thing for someone like Trent Brown.
Yes.
Trent Brown, who played for the Patriots last year, is a former 49er. You have to worry. He's a guy you might have to worry about his weight, because he has been enormous at different points. Not that Becton hasn't, but he's had those kind of things in his clauses before. But I do think that someone like Brown is a very high floor, low ceiling buy. If you're looking for, hey, we just need a starter level left tackle quality guy that we can at least kind of rely on. Maybe he's not going to be superstar. Maybe he won't be great. I think Trent Brown, he'll be a little bit more expensive probably, but I think you'll get at least solid left tackle play from him if you wanted to sign him onto the team.
Yeah, the thing with Trent Brown is when he's on and he's healthy, he's a Pro Bowl level left tackle at 370 pounds. And he does have the position flexibility. He played both left tackle and right tackle for the Patriots. He was their left tackle when they won the Super Bowl back in 2018, I believe. He first played with the 49ers, played right tackle over there, signed with the Raiders to play right tackle. His career is really, really interesting. But when he's healthy and he's right, I'm telling you, he is a really, really good player. You just have to have the right coaching staff and the right situation in place. I don't know if that's Dallas or not, but I'd be willing to find out.
His market is weird. His market is going to be weird. It's going to be interesting to see what he commands, and it's something to keep an eye on, because there's a possibility that he takes a lesser contract to go somewhere.
Absolutely.
So, I would keep an eye on him as well.
All right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen every single day. Go check out the channel on YouTube. We post videos every single day over there. Go download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. Go follow Landon on Twitter at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus_Mosier, and we will see you right back here on Monday.